Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Oh man, this is either going to be a historic episode or the biggest flop fail that I've ever had. I took an expensive gamble on this guitar because I saw it late one night on Reverb. However, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't even click on the listing. It wasn't until the next morning that I put two and two together that this guitar had specs that it should not have. It was birthed a year before it should have even existed. I'm pretty sure this is an experiment guitar or a prototype or something. It was worthy enough to take the chance to document this thing. And the model we're talking about today is that little known solid body 335. Now, I've actually documented one of every single model of these. So I didn't think I'd ever have to document one again, but I can't say I'm sad because this thing is a little bit of a freak. And it's got kind of a custom case. Normally you see this with like the later basses that Gibson did. Let's go ahead and take a look at this weird Kalamazoo creation. Yes, sirree. There it is. The 335S. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, the first thing you're going to notice is what I noticed. It has block inlays like an SG standard of this era. The leading photo of this guitar was like something like this. It really just showed like the top of the body and the block inlays. And that's why I didn't click on it at first, because I thought, that's just another regular 335S. But that next morning I realized it should not have block inlays. But then look at our headstock. Have you ever seen something like this on a Gibson electric guitar? We'll actually learn a little bit later on where this headstock veneer comes from. But before we get too far into this thing, let's do a quick recap about these 335S guitars. In the year 1978, Gibson came out with a model called The Paul. It was an all-walnut Les Paul, maybe not a hit right away, but people love those things today. They used to be really affordable. I would suggest them to everybody, but now, sadly, they've doubled and tripled in price. They're still great guitars, though. But the whole walnut body with the T-top pickups, they're a great choice. So, in 1979, Gibson followed that up with a model called the SG. Basically, the same thing, but an SG format. But then, in the year 1980, they rebrand both of those as Firebrands and also introduce a deluxe model, and at roughly the same time, they come out with the model we're talking about today, the 335S. Not a lot of people know about these things. They're generally more expensive, or at least they used to be, than the Paul or the SG, because they were a little bit more rare. And they only lasted for roughly about 3 years or so, give or take. And they had 3 different variations. There was the standard, the custom, and the deluxe. Now, I said them in that order for a reason, because that's actually how they rank. It's one of those weird times in Gibson history where a deluxe ranks higher than a custom, whereas in Les Paul territory, a deluxe ranks lower than a custom. But anyways, the standards, they look like this. I have a great review and demo of one of these. Probably should have kept that guitar. They were all maple. Maple bodies, maple necks. They had the Tim Shaw PAFs, a satin finish. They were pretty darn cool. The custom stepped things up with the then premium Mahogany body and the newer Dirty Fingers pickups that were super hot. They put a coil split on them that they called a coil tap at the time. They slapped a TP6 tailpiece on there, but they were still a satin finish. Check one of those out in this old video. And then you have the Big Mac Daddy Deluxe. This is where you get the gloss finish and custom colors, like Silver Burst, Tobacco Sunburst. There's a few other ones out there. They finally integrate a regular headstock veneer on them with a Gibson Mother of Pearl logo. They get the bound ebony fretboard, still with dot inlays throughout all 3 of the series. They even have the inclusion of an interesting little pickguard, a super high-end and trendy brass nut, and generally, if you want a super fancy guitar within the 335S lineup, that's what you go for. So what the heck is this? I love it. So if we actually look at the truss rod cover here, it says Professional 335S Deluxe. So this might actually be an early prototype design of what they thought it should have been, the highest end 335. Because remember, I was just telling you, those things had bound ebony fretboards with dot inlays. This one has the small block inlays, just, be a little bit fancier, kind of emulate a later 60s 335. However, you have to remember 335s are that weird fan group that actually prefers dots over anything else because that's what the 50s original ones have. And I don't know about you guys, but I've always thought that the 335S Deluxe headstock look obnoxiously plain. So to see this thing on here makes me so happy, because the reason why I fell in love with the original Norlin Era guitars is because of the unique peg head veneers that they had. You have things like the 25-50th anniversary Les Paul, the Les Paul Artisan. You've got the Artists, the Spotlight Specials have a weird thing going on the Antique Naturals. Anything that had a unique inlay pattern on it, I was all about. So when I saw this thing have that, I got really excited because this is an acoustic guitar I've always wanted. It's called a Gibson Heritage. That is where this peg head veneer came from. That model was first introduced in the late 60s, lasted until the early 80s with a few different spec changes along the way, but generally they would have these beautiful rosewood back and sides and just be all around kind of quirky looking guitars, but I always loved this inlay design on it. And generally, I'm not much of an acoustic collector guy, so I'd never really got one, but to be able to get it on, you know, a solid body electric, something that I would like and want to own within my collection, it just made me so genuinely happy to be able to get this thing. I was just hoping that this wasn't some sort of a Frankenstein that somebody, you know, did up by themselves, because the one thing that scared me about this is like the body finish looks all right, the top finish looks okay, but the back of the headstock, the finish is a little bit weird. It's not like what you normally see Gibson do. Generally we have like a burst, but this one just has a flat burst in this area, so that made me go, ooh, I don't know. And then the seller was describing the neck as a D shape. And yeah, this is not like any 335S that I remember. It's got that really, really skinny nut width here, and then it gets really fat and chunky, kind of like SG's did. But yet it's still not exactly like an SG neck because it's a little bit thicker. So my best guess is this fretboard, if this is indeed a factory prototype, probably came from an SG Standards neck that was just like laying around. But now's where things get interesting. Let's look at the back side of the headstock. This is what convinced me to buy it. So our serial number looks kind of strange, high up on the headstock, a little bit clustered. That's how you know you have something special if it comes from Kalamazoo. And thankfully, this one is a Kalamazoo built one, 475th in production, which is really high production number for Kalamazoo. But this one dates to 1979, 180th day of the year. That's way before this model ever came out. Like, maybe there are some late 79s out there that I just haven't seen, but to find one within the first half of the year, I can guarantee you that no, this model was not out yet. But you want to see something else really cool? It's got the flip out winding tuners in 1979. Now, a lot of people don't know this, and even I wouldn't know this yet today had I not ran into a Les Paul Artisan at one point in time from 1977 that had it stock. I was convinced that somebody had replaced those things, but no, you can find them as early as 77. They just didn't really heavily use these crank flip out winding tuners until the early to mid 80s. I can see some light wear and tear. Everything is so far looking okay. So here's what I'm hoping. Remember that the Paul I was just talking about? I've actually seen the prototype the Paul, and it had a marking in here instead of the traditional Gibson original prototype stamping back there. I'm really hoping when we tear this thing apart, we're going to find some sort of a clue here as to what this is. Is it a prototype? Is it a factory employee guitar? Like maybe this was finished in like the 80s just using spare stuff, which is completely possible. Pot codes and electronic dating will help us with that. But maybe there's something in the case that'll help us here. Nope, there's nothing in the case to help us there. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and throw this thing on the workbench to take a look at its parts and specs, to hopefully solve this mystery. All right, let me walk you through this thing. It's kind of an interesting beast. So, our pickups that are located in here, I don't even have to show you the backside. You should already know these are Dirty Fingers pickups because of the double row of adjustable pole pieces. It's the only Gibson pickup that did that in this era. But if we look on the backside, we want to pay attention to date codes on this. So this particular pickup dates to 1980. Our serial number is mid-1979, so I mean that's within the general correctness, right? But let's see what our bridge pickup is. It looks like 1981. That's the way you date these things. So if I remember correctly, the first three tell you something about the model, but the last three are the ones that are most important. So last two digits tell you the year, and then this tells you the month of production. So very early 1981, February. whereas this one dates to the 11th month of 1980, so very late 80. So these are all about the exact same time, but still about a year and a half off of our serial number. But that's all within the realm of possibilities here. But now let's take a look at our pickup routes. So unfortunately, nothing in our neck pickup. However, this is how 335S's were routed, so we're all good there. Then our bridge pickup. Maybe it's just because I want to see something out of that, but if there is any writing in that and it's not just like smudges of the stain, I can't read it. I can't make it out. Something interesting about the bridge pickup cavity though, this is what they normally look like, a nice centered screw that gets into the wood. But over here, it looks like at one point in time, somebody filled in the correct hole to drill it in the incorrect location. So now it just doesn't secure to anything. That's a little bit strange. So unfortunately, no clues for us within the pickup routes, but that the Paul prototype, it had stuff written on it on the underside of this area. So don't count this out as not being a prototype just quite yet. But let's go ahead, while we're doing this, document the readings of these pickups. Bridge pickup reads 15.3 k ohms. Our neck position a little bit hotter at 16.28. And then the middle position at 7.89. Dirty Fingers pickups are hot. That's just how they're meant to be. The first model to use them was actually the Gibson 335, believe it or not, in the late 70s. But we also have a coil split switch, which will have our readings. So 7.75 in our bridge, 9.15 in the neck, that's interesting, and then the combination 4.22. So humbuckers and kind of single coil-esque tones that we can get out of this. Now our bridge. Let's take a real close look at this. The bridge itself, definitely chrome, nice and shiny. Looking at the back, it has the markings that it should have. In the late 70s, early 80s, they are Schaller made in Germany. You can see the made in Germany markings right here. In the 90s, they have made in Germany and there, and then they kind of switch over to Godot parts for a little bit. So that's correct. It's got some aging, but look at our thumb wheels. These almost look nickel to me, and this bridge was a little bit hard to remove. Now, I would have never noticed the nickel chrome mismatch here had I not actually had the frame of reference of the bridge, but it's possible that those thumb wheels have been replaced, or there is a little bit deeper meaning behind that. Now let's move on to the tailpiece. Generally speaking, Gibson ones aren't as rounded. However, this is a TP6 tailpiece, and it has been a while since I've actually looked at a stock original TP6 tailpiece guitar, so maybe that's the same, maybe it's not. This TP6 tailpiece is definitely original. However, there is a possibility that these posts are not. Okay, so far so good. I mean, if a guitar got played, it makes sense that something could be replaced. Looking at our knobs compared to pure white, you can tell, yep, those are vintage original. They've got a nice look to them. Same style mini toggle that we've got there. This is all looking correct to me as well. But you have 2 volumes and 2 tones, 1 set for each pickup, and a recessed output jack on the side. But now let's talk the body. How many pieces is this? What is it made out of? It appears to be mahogany and 4 pieces. So you've got one section like right here, then you've got that seam line, and then you got one right here and one right there. That's what's nice about having this center seam still. Despite not being a 2-piece top, sometimes you can look at it and go, oh, it's got the center seam, so it must be 2. No. So we've got 2 pieces right there, and then basically the wings. But it looks pretty nice in this dark sunburst finish. As far as the condition goes, it's very nice. We've got a little bit of a scratch impression or something right there, but this was definitely well taken care of. The most important thing about this whole guitar is that it smells correct. If you've ever dealt with the 70s, 80s guitar, especially clean ones, they have a certain scent to them. So I'm not really suspicious of a refinish at this point in time due to that reason. So let's move on from our body to our neck. Now you're going to see there's a lot of small superficial cracking in the fretboard. I was actually really impressed the seller disclosed this because most of them don't. Is it a crack? Yes. Does it really matter? Nah. You could take this to a luthier, get that all filled in. Generally, it doesn't detract from the value unless it's like a super big wide crack and it's causing problems. But sometimes that happens on fretboards. This one has definitely kind of dried out. It could use a fret sprout job. And in fact, it would not surprise me if somebody has already tried that at one point in time, because the fret ends don't quite look like the normal way Gibson does them. They're a little bit overly flattened right here, not rounded off. But we have 22 frets on this ebony fretboard with the mother of pearl block inlays. We've got that typical 24 3/4 inch scale length with a super skinny 1.58 inch nut width. That increases to 2 by the 12th, with a chunky 0.89 first fret neck depth, and then just a really beefy 1.02 by the 12th. Here's what that looks like at the first fret and the 12th fret. It starts off as like a full C shape that just completely moves on to more of a D shape neck. Production run 335S's. The thing I remember most about them is they're really wide feeling necks and they're pretty thin, so this is not the standard neck you would find on this model. But now get this, we look at the headstock, and looking at the wood in the truss rod channel cavity, that almost looks like maple to me. This model did not come with a maple neck when it was officially issued. And again, we didn't get this heritage headstock inlay either. So I'm almost hypothesizing here that maybe this is just an acoustic guitar neck that somebody had retrofitted onto one of these bodies, like an employee guitar, because sometimes that stuff happened. You gotta remember, Kalamazoo shut down, and then they were moving all the inventory to Nashville. Sometimes they would get guitars like these where they would just build them up, ship them out as something special, or be a NAMM show display piece. I'm kind of leaning more towards that rather than this actually being built in 79. However, I don't think we're going to have conclusive evidence for sure on this. But that's definitely that late 70s Gibson logo before they go into that super blocky type. And the logos have that nice, slightly yellowed over look to them. They're not overly clean, which is what I was kind of terrified about. Awesome flip out winding tuners here. And we've got a little bit of wear along the edges. Unfortunately, this one did not get the brass nut. I always loved that on late 70s, early 80s Gibsons. That's cool. But this one has a regular one, so that makes it different. But we do have the professional 335S Deluxe truss rod cover. That's got a lot of nice aging to it. While I'm putting this back together, I'm actually noticing you can see a very small gap right here. So the pickup cavity is not fully covered. So that's what kind of makes me think this was maybe like a factory second body. So maybe rather than an in-factory house job, this was like a Gibson employee taking it home or working on it off the clock. That's kind of what some parts guitars ended up being. Now let's move over to the backside. So the first time I looked in here, I didn't see anything, but a second look, I did find something here. So right here, S-E-T-H? Seth? It's Seth's guitar? No, that's what I thought at first. It looks like it says setup, like the guitar was set up on this date or something. And I see a 20 stamp right here. You see that quite often, but this date actually helps us a lot. June 23rd, 1981. The body post dates the electronics and our serial number that we have right here. So this is another pointing sign to this might be some sort of a parts guitar, pieced together as an employee project after hours or during hours, just trying to use up inventory. As far as that goes, we'll never know. But the next pertinent thing to take a look at are our pot codes, which date to the 18th week of 1978. This one's not quite legible, but it looks like 78 or 79 is what we can see right there. And these guys are too far covered over to be able to tell. But everything's looking pretty well period correct in here.
One last resort to try to get some answers for this, I contacted Randy Leonard, an ex-employee of Gibson that worked during this time period. Now, generally speaking, he'll only have Nashville numbers in his logs because that's the plant that he worked at. However, due to parts guitars like these, occasionally he will have the odd Kalamazoo number. And unfortunately, this was not one of his works. However, he did find a 335S with a November of 1979 Kalamazoo serial number that he built in February of 1982. So all that kind of matches up with this one. So he was thinking this was probably an employee parts guitar, just like a runoff of some sort. And it's nice to know that there is one more, serial number 73059138 out there, that hopefully one day we'll be able to find too.
But we can look at the back side of this guitar. Again, it's 4 pieces, but they blended it pretty well. It's mainly just that center seam line that really kind of looks out of place on this one. We've got some scratches down here, our typical comfort cut, and some more strap wear. Just regular strap buttons on this. Fortunately, no diamond posi locks. Since we're discussing the originality of this guitar, it's probably apropos to mention this screw and this screw have been replaced. They have just slightly smaller heads to them that are more rounded. So maybe the guy was just grabbing anything that he happened to have on his workbench. But But I'm really glad I pulled that truss rod cover off, because I really thought this was mahogany, but now that I look at the wood grain, it does look very similar to the maple neck of the standard that I had. It just has a finish over top of it. So that is a spec that is different between the official ones of these that were made. So it really is looking like this neck was not initially intended to be a part of a 335S. I mean, this has got that big 70s Kalamazoo style volute. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier. These things weren't made in Kalamazoo. Maybe a prototype of it was at one point in time, but generally they were Nashville-made guitars. So having a 335S made at Kalamazoo is kind of a strange anomaly. You're also going to notice there is no Made in USA stamp on this. That's why this also looks kind of strange. That does happen sometimes in Kalamazoo. Sometimes it was intentionally left off because it's one of those old guys that's like, hey, we didn't do this in the 50s, I don't want to do it. Other times it's just, a factory error. The press didn't put it all the way into the wood, and then in the finished stages it disappeared. Or, I guess on the pessimistic side, somebody could have sanded it off when they refinished the guitar. But we'll have to wait till we blacklight this to see that. But so far, I'm convinced this was some sort of a parts guitar, where someone was using up inventory or just having fun. A good example of a leftover parts guitar is the Hippo from my personal collection. You can check it out in this review and demo. So that one had a custom shop edition decal on the back of it, but with like an early 70s serial number. Sadly, we don't have any custom shop edition decal on this one to help us date it. A lot can happen to a guitar in 40 years. So here's what our headstock looks like under blacklight. Pretty nice even glow here. Inlays have a little bit of glowing. Body also has a glow. But you gotta remember, blacklights cannot tell us how old a finish is. It just tells us if it's uniform. Like if it was all refinished at the same point in time, it could still look the same. So we're looking for something that maybe glows a little bit more. But this is looking okay to me. Here's what our back's looking like. I would say that looks about right to me as well. We don't always look inside the control cavities, but yeah, sometimes the brown stuff that comes off the solder joints, that fluoresces. The neck joint looks the way I would expect it to. You can see some light finish chipping around the fret ends. As I was telling you, yeah, you definitely have some fret sprout going on this thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody tried to take care of that before, and that's why the frets look a little bit weird. The neck itself is just looking good to me. All nice and even. I was kind of scared around the headstock that we might have a break or something, but that's looking fine. And so is the back side of our headstock. So I'm going to say this finish was at least all sprayed at the same time. And judging by the smell, most likely original to the guitar. But I didn't point this out. The heel is really small on this. And it's really sculpted and shaped away. I like that. But all said and done, how much does this one weigh? Looks like about 8.5 pounds, 8 pounds, 4.7 ounces. So not exactly what I was hoping this was. I was really hoping we'd have Gibson original prototype stamped inside it somewhere. It appears to be some sort of a factory parts guitar of unknown origin, but man, is it cool. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. Let's go ahead and run through the tones of this. This is the Marshall Blues Breaker. Still trying to tweak it in, so feel free to give me some suggestions there. forget, you can also coil split all that. So here's our single coil-esque tones. To be honest, never really loved the tones out of coil split humbuckers out of the Norlin era, but it's a sound. That didn't sound half too bad through the blues breaker. Interesting tones. Let's go ahead and kick on a little bit of dirt. Now that we know all about this weird mystery guitar, what are my final thoughts on it? Yeah, probably some sort of just a hodgepodge of parts that they were trying to use up, or some sort of a special employee build. So, unfortunately, not the 335S prototype like I was hoping, but hey, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I still don't really count this as a loss because it was a lot of fun checking this thing out. And, you know, playing it through this Marshall Blues Breaker, I actually like the coil split tones for about the first time on one of these Norlin Era guitars. So that just goes to show you, don't spend your money on guitars. Just get yourself a couple of good selections of amps. I know it's not as fun to buy, but I mean, if you're a player, that's what you should be doing. It's easy to get caught in the rabbit hole of guitar collecting because these are a lot more fun to buy. That doesn't mean I'm turning into an amp guy because I still don't understand them. I definitely prefer talking about guitars. But this neck profile truly is something just a little bit different as compared to anything else I've played. I mean, it's very similar to like the 65 Melody Makers like we were talking about earlier, but it's a little bit chunkier and beefier than that. So it really wouldn't surprise me if this might have been like some sort of other guitar's neck. But there we go, an artistic Frankenstein version of what a 335S Deluxe could have been. All right, troglodytes, thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.